Hey, we have special guests. Nicolas Hulscher is a epidemiologist and administrator at the McCullough Foundation who earned his master's in public health from the University of Michigan. He's a prolific researcher with over 25 publications, serving as lead author on significant studies regarding COVID-19 vaccine injuries, myocarditis, post-acute I can't say that word. His work focuses on bringing complex scientific data with public understanding to advocate for medical freedom and evidence-based health decisions. Welcome to the show, Nicolas. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you showing up. Now, I follow you on Twitter, and I saw this. You said the U.S. government cancer data just dropped. Overall cancers in those under 50 jumped 6.4% from 2021 to 2023 during mass MRA uptakes. Brain tumors increased 19%, colon rectal cancers 19.4%, small intestine cancer 15.5%, ovarian cancer, stomach cancer. I know someone who just died of stomach cancer, breast cancer, and here's from your Substack. Breaking U.S. government cancer data shows early onset cancers surged 6.4% in a 30-month population-wide analysis of 296,000 residents of Pescara province, Italy. Individuals who received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine showed a 23% higher likelihood of hospitalization for cancer of any site compared with the unvaccinated. Risks were particularly elevated for colorectal, breast, and bladder cancer. And I went and I wanted to check this out. So, first of all, this is the first population study that showed an increase in cancer. Here's the study. 1 year risk of cancers associated with COVID-19 vaccination, large population-based cohort study. They did it in South Korea, and they found that the COVID-19 vax could be associated with an increased risk of 6 specific cancers, the ones we just told you. So, so let me bring in Nicolas. Tell me, how could this possibly be true, and why is this not being widely reported?
Yeah, this should be front page news absolutely everywhere. And so, what's key though about the most recent U.S. government cancer data dump is that we were waiting for it for like 4 years, right? So that was just 2023 data that just dropped. But this was the gold standard cancer surveillance system called SEER, which stands for Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results Program. And so that basically just gives the US cancer incidence data. How many new cases of cancer per year. And it's very worrisome. And what just dropped confirms what we've been worried about, for the past 5 years, that the mRNA injections were indeed inducing cancer. And so, yeah, it jumped in those under 50 years old from 2021 to 2023, 6.4% overall. And that's a pretty big jump. That's tens of thousands of extra cancer cases that should not be occurring in these age groups. And you laid it out earlier. Brain tumors were up 19% in those under 50 years old. Central nervous system tumors, breast cancer, stomach cancer, all of these cancers were high, but the biggest one was colon cancer, 19% higher. And yeah, it's very worrisome, and it corroborates all 3 independent analyses, 3 of them, and 2 of them in different countries. One was in Italy, like you just laid out there, with 300,000 people. They found the mRNA injections increased the risk of 3 distinct types of cancers and overall cancer hospitalizations by 23%. And then we had the study in South Korea with 8 million people and 8.4 million, and they found those increased risks of 6 major cancers comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated. And lastly, there was another analysis of different CDC data, CDC mortality data, and he found 138,000 excess cancer deaths in the United States alone since 2021. So yeah, these injections appear to have induced a cancer epidemic.
So now, is this just a correlation, or are they saying it's a causation in these studies?
They say it's just a correlation, but that's all those studies can do. But what we can do as researchers is look at the biological plausibility, and there's hundreds of studies now looking at the biological plausibility. There's over 17 distinct mechanisms that the shots may induce cancer. 17, and one big one is, or three big ones are hyperinflammation, immune dysregulation, and actually genetic disruption. We found it turns off tumor suppressor genes p53 and BRCA. And in fact, we published a paper finding it integrated into the genome of a stage 4 bladder cancer patient. This vaccine DNA plasmid was literally fused into her tumor DNA. And yeah, it's undeniable now.
So 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 the mechanism is it so I don't understand the mechanism. I know that the COVID vax was would tell me if this is the correct way to say it, polluted with DNA that would contaminate your DNA, and then they're finding the spike protein inside cancer cells. Am I correct on those things?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. His name was Professor Sano in Japan. He found vaccine spike protein inside breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer cells, in the nucleus of those cells, which probably means it was causing it. We know the spike protein itself appears to be carcinogenic based on all the laboratory studies. And you're right, the DNA is left over in the vials from the manufacturing process. It's supposed to be cleaned out, but it's not. Over 10 reports have found DNA contamination exceeding regulatory limits by like tens of thousands of percent. So that can get into the genome. And so that's not supposed to be in there, but you inject it in lipid nanoparticles, it gets in. And again, that's what our study showed. That DNA that's not supposed to be there got into this woman's chromosome 19, seemingly resulting in the stage 4 turbo bladder cancer.
And so was Pfizer, Moderna, were they aware of this, and did they suppress this, or is this news to them?
Yeah, they apparently, as far as we're publicly aware, they did not do any carcinogenicity or genotoxicity studies whatsoever before rolling them out to humans. Now, they may have, and that's classified, and they haven't released it to the public, which wouldn't surprise me either. It could be one of the two. But regardless, we're just now uncovering this. Independent researchers are finding this, and we're seeing it in the population data. And, there's got to be some form of accountability here. We got to get these shots off of the market. We cannot be accelerating now our cancer rates. It's the second leading cause of death worldwide.
So we know that they lied, that Pfizer lied, because during a couple years ago, during a hearing at the European Parliament, they had an executive from Pfizer admit that they never even tested to see if the vaccine stopped transmission or contraction, even though they said it was 95% effective at doing those things. And of course, so we know that to me, it seems like, of course, they knew that. They didn't release that study. This is my theory. And then, of course, they're like, oh, no, the reason why the executive from Pfizer said they didn't do the studies was because they were moving at the speed of science. That's a made-up term, and you would think the speed of science would include a test to see if it actually does what they think it's going to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. The speed of science with a novel gene therapy is, 10 to 15 years. It's not 6 months.
That's right.
And so, yeah, it was an absolute travesty. And, I agree. They probably did have these data, and they didn't release it. We know they manipulated the trial data. They did all sorts of illegal practices before emergency use authorization, all laid out in the Pfizer papers by Naomi Wolf. And again, that's illegal. That's criminal charges. And so there was going to be an investigation into them. Well, in fact, there is an ongoing investigation. Senator Ron Johnson found that the FDA buried myocarditis and stroke signals. They didn't tell the public. And so all these people got heart damage and strokes because the government suppressed data. They covered it up.
I would like to say this is shocking, but it's not shocking to me because I've been following this closely since I got vaccine injured in April of 2021. And just talking about this anywhere, I was met with such overwhelming animosity and people trying to tell me to shut up and thinking that I was spreading misinformation. It's so weird because I always considered myself a lefty, and lefties were always skeptical of Big Pharma. We knew they were a criminal organization that would regularly kill people for profit. We all knew that. But somehow when COVID happened, they flipped and they all became spokespeople for Big Pharma and the government, like Dr. Fauci, who's an unbelievable liar, so much so he needed to get a pardon going back to 2015. So that, to me, that's the. Do you see any? I mean, the people the lefties that I used to hang out with used to protest against GMO in foods, and then they look like the rock musician Neil Young, and he just completely flipped. And he went from protesting GMOs in food to saying, I'm going to take my music off of Spotify because Joe Rogan's telling the truth about COVID and the vaccines. Do you run into that too? Are you just as surprised as I was by that kind of, and what do you have any theories on how we can account for that kind of flip-flop in people's thinking?
Yeah, I run into that often, and I still do. And yeah, all those individuals that hopped on the Pfizer, Moderna government bandwagon with these shots, now they look very foolish, especially now with the cancer data release. So now's the time to acknowledge reality. Don't take any more booster shots. And unfortunately, many of those individuals did fall into what's called mass psychosis. They fell into this trap, believing everything the government said, wanting to basically do and think what their peers thought, and they couldn't get out of it. And then they subjected themselves to multiple booster shots, and now they may be facing these large increases in cancer risks, heart damage, subclinical heart damage, brain damage. We published multiple studies on that now. And so, yeah, we gotta stop this. This was madness. The past 5 years, people lost their minds. We got to get back to reality.
Now, that study I referenced early in this segment, that hasn't been peer reviewed yet, correct?
Which one?
Oh, hang on. I just, I lost it. But have there been the one that I've the most recent one that shows a 6.4%?
Oh yeah. The SEER data, that doesn't get peer reviewed. That's literally just straight from the government's database. They post it every year, and it goes through a large vetting process and analyses process, and it's used, by all sorts of organizations, governments, to assess cancer incidence. That particular data doesn't necessarily need to be peer reviewed. It's been vetted for decades already. But the two other papers that found the COVID shots increased the risk of 7 major cancers, those were peer reviewed.
Whoa. So again, this is just for informational purposes. We're not giving anyone medical advice at this show. Always consult your own physician before you make any medical decisions. Don't come. And that's our advice. And hopefully that's enough to cover our ass here. We'll see what happens. We got more to talk about with you, but I want to remind people, if you want to hear me talk about this, I'll be in Burbank, California, May 7th, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and then May 23rd in Atlanta, Georgia, May 24th, Raleigh, North Carolina, then Spokane, Tacoma, and Levittown, New York. Go to jimmydore.com for tickets. Over to Steph.
All right. David said, Jimmy, look at the shadows of the poles and trees when the guy jumps down. They all lean way right. It cannot be 12:30 p.m. That footage is from another day. Thank you, David, for that. Maybe Tyler had a cartoon gun that shot out of the flag that says bang. Diligent escape. Hold on. David Icke is correct. Israel government is operating for the worldwide cult, Quantum. Play the clip where Charlie Kirk says he's not a fan of circumcision. You got to know that made some enemies. And
Oh
that's
my
Future Interact.
God.
Jimmy, I sent it to one of your emails that you
Oh, no
you would
kidding. I
prefer.
didn't know
I
that.
just texted it to you. Mr. Measy, and thank you for, and that was my friend, Future Intact. Thank you for the link. That was very helpful. I already shared it with Jimmy.
So,
Back to Jim.
So again, now there's been some really groundbreaking studies recently about the treatment of cancer, and 84% of cancer patients taking a combination of ivermectin and mebendazole for 6 months declared their cancer was either completely gone, regressed, or had stopped spreading. Let's listen to a little bit.
It was the largest human observational study on ivermectin, mebendazole, and cancer. We had like 200 cancer patients. And what we found was after 6 months, 84.4% of them reported to have benefited in their cancer treatments. About half, either their cancers disappeared, they had no evidence of disease, or their tumors shrank. And again, that is half of this entire cohort.
So I actually went and looked up this study, and there it is. Real-world clinical outcomes of ivermectin and mebendazole on cancer patients, results from a prospective observational cohort. Okay, this has not been peer-reviewed yet, but here's the cancers they're talking about: prostate, breast, lung, colon, and liver. Right, and here's the disease status at baseline. So, can you explain this graphic to us?
Yeah. So what you'll see there is on the one to the left, you'll see 37% of the entire cancer cohort had active metastatic cancer. So the cancer was spreading of the 200 cancer patients. And then, 63% had stable cancer. So they had tumors, but it wasn't actively metastatic. So it was not stage 3 or 4 yet. And then on the right, you'll basically just see that that's the not spreading graph there.
Okay. And then tell me what this says.
Yeah, so this is the biggest part, actually. This is the cancer outcomes. This was the primary outcome we measured. And so these patients were prescribed through the telemedicine platform of the wellness company ivermectin and mebendazole, compounded capsules. And so we collected the baseline status as you just went through. This was the follow-up status after 6 months. About 61% responded, so that's a 61% response rate. That's pretty high for a survey study like this. So these are self-reported cancer outcomes. And after the 6 months of taking the ivermectin and mebendazole, 32.8% declared that their cancers disappeared. They had what's called no evidence of disease. 15.6% reported that their tumors were shrinking. It's called regression. And then 36% said their cancers were not progressing. So that's called cancer stabilization. And that makes up the 84.4% clinical benefit ratio. In other words, 84.4% of the cancer patients who took ivermectin and mebendazole benefited in their cancer treatment. And then 15.6% did actually progress. And so that actually gives validity to these results. These are not skewed. This appears to be real, but more study now is needed with clinical adjudication of the outcome. So now we have to do randomized human trials, which costs, tens of millions of dollars, by the way, and nobody's funding it.
And so, because of COVID, I've realized how corrupted the medical system is, and it's all based on money and profit. And even the medical journals are completely corrupted. We've learned that. And there's a big incentive. I got this from Dr. John Campbell. Overall, it is estimated that annual costs of standard chemotherapies average $111,000 per year. So if you use ivermectin and mebendazole, it's going to be pennies on the dollar, right? That'll be much cheaper, correct?
Yeah, ivermectin and mebendazole, it's going to be a few grand at most a year, not 111,000. And so you pay $111,000 a year to destroy your whole body, right? And so, it doesn't sound like a great deal to me. I'd rather spend much less and not destroy my entire body.
Well, that's the thing here. Dr. Campbell points out this: if you use ivermectin and bembendazoole, it is low toxicity. Whereas when you get chemotherapy, it's highly toxic. It wipes out your immune system. This doesn't do that, and it has multi-targeted. So it's not just for one type of cancer; it's for lots of different types of cancer, right?
Oh yeah. So there's been over 100 preclinical studies in the animals, in the rats, and in the test tube with ivermectin, mebendazole, and fenbendazole, these antiparasitics in cancers and cancer cells. And they found across these studies over the past few decades, there are over 14 distinct anti-cancer mechanisms across more than 12 cancer types. And so it exerts so many mechanisms against the cancer cells, unlike chemo, which basically operates on one mechanism. But with the antiparasitics, a few key mechanisms are that, first of all, it induces apoptosis in cancer cells. That's what's called, basically the cell becomes self-programs to self-destruct. So you want that in cancer cells, obviously. It cuts off cancer angiogenesis, so the blood vessels to new cancer cells can't form as well. It disrupts microtubules in the cancer cells. That's critical for cell division. So if you disrupt that scaffolding of the cells, they can't divide anymore. And there's many other things. We could keep going down the list. Ivermectin actually targets cancer stem cells. And so cancer stem cells are critical. They're like the source of some of these cancers. And chemo doesn't get rid of them. So you might get rid of the cancer with chemo, but it's going to come back in 5 years because you still have the cancer stem cells. Ivermectin appears to eliminate them in the laboratory studies. So you target cancer with all these mechanisms. It's no surprise we saw such a high clinical benefit ratio.
So I became aware of the lies that Dr. Fauci and the medical establishment and the big pharma captured establishment media were telling, because when I got vaccine injured, I had a doctor who was doing a study on how to treat people who were vaccine injured, and he put me in the study, and one of the first things he prescribed for me was ivermectin, and I remember saying, "Hey, this is horse paste," and he explained to me that no, ivermectin was considered a miracle drug, a wonder drug that they thought could even cure cancer before COVID started. And the reason why they were lying and misleading people about ivermectin, saying it was for animals and not humans, was because if it did work on COVID, they could not get their emergency use authorization for the COVID vaccine. And of course, they wanted to get that because there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars involved in getting that approved. They got it approved. And now we find out that they were lying all along. Even people like Chris Cuomo, who was pushing that kind of propaganda, pro-Fauci, big pharma, he now got vaccine injured and he's being treated. And so now he realizes that he was lied to about it, and he repeated those lies without ever investigating it. And so that's just my own personal story about ivermectin. That was the first tip-off that I got, that they weren't only lying about ivermectin, they were lying about everything to do with COVID and the vaccines. They were lying about where the virus came from. They were lying about funding the creation of the virus. They were lying about the death rate from the virus. They made it seem way more deadly than it actually was. They were lying about masks. They were lying about lockdowns. They were lying about the vaccine stopping transmission, the vaccine stopping contraction, social distancing. There wasn't a thing about COVID that Dr. Fauci and the establishment media did not lie to you about. Am I wrong when I say that?
Your assessment is 100% correct. Basically, 95% of the things we were told were a lie. They were false. They were not real. And because of those lies, millions of people have paid the price. They've died. They've been injured. via all the things, the hospital protocols, the ventilators, the remdesivir, the mRNA injections. Millions have suffered, and they got away with it.
I even forgot to mention the ventilators. Fauci eventually came around to admitting, yeah, we were wrong to put people on ventilators. So what they would do is they'd put people on ventilators, and then they would give them drugs to slow their breathing. Isn't that what happened?
Yeah, they would throw them on the ventilators. The ventilators would kill a lot of the people. And then, they would pump them with remdesivir, which causes kidney failure. It's extremely toxic to the kidneys, and then they just died. And so it was ridiculous. And so many of these patients never needed to go on the ventilator. Perhaps they could have taken the repurposed drugs, the ivermectin, the hydroxychloroquine, and these other drugs that now we have 105 studies showing they worked.
So,
yeah.
I know people in the comedy world in Los Angeles who they had a loved one die of COVID early on, and they became vehement propaganda pushers and haters of people questioning the COVID narrative because of it. And they would go on stage and try to shame their own audience into looking into COVID or looking into what the government and Big Pharma was saying about it. It's one of the most despicable things. And I understand people being traumatized by a loved one dying from COVID, but shouldn't that, in my estimation, that would make you want to get more informed instead of less informed. And it's just the most despicable thing I've seen happen just in the comedy world, because I've always been proud to be a comedian because we always question authority. We always push back on establishment narratives and find holes in the status quo. And that completely flipped during COVID. And those people are still, they have not apologized. They haven't said that they were wrong. They haven't even looked into it. And they're still running around wearing masks today, lots of them. No kidding. No kidding. And so I just want to show you this. This is Dr. John Campbell, and this is what his conclusion about this study we're talking about.
It explains here the anti-cancer mechanisms of ivermectin and mebendazole and the way that they attack various tumors using various mechanisms. So there we are. This research needs to be done to know if this is all correct in the larger scale clinical trial situation. It's probably not going to be done, which of course is a complete utter disgrace and a complete tragedy to those people suffering cancers. Could be me, could be you, could be a family member. Just let them die if they can't pay the $111,000 a year. What the heck? I don't know. Why aren't governments doing this research? Why aren't independent universities doing this research?
I'll tell you why, and I think he knows why, is because they're also captured by the big money pharma gives, and then Dr. Fauci would be the one who divvied out money for research. And if you don't go along with the program, you're not going to get that money. Isn't that why they're not doing that research?
Yeah, it's exactly why. They're not going to get any money. They're not going to make any profits. They cannot patent ivermectin and mebendazole. They can patent the novel gene therapies, the biologics, the immune checkpoint inhibitors, the chemotherapies. They can patent all of that, and they can make hundreds of millions of dollars. But ivermectin and mebendazole, no money to be made. And so they're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. We can do it. McCullough Foundation, we can do this study. But, we don't have the funding capacities of these giant pharmaceutical corporations and governments that should have done these studies, 50 years ago.
Let's see if he has anything else to say.
Just because there's no money in it. Is that why it's not done?
There it is.
Let me know what you think. Let's close with phenomenal frustration, but at least you watched, so thank you for that.
Phenomenal frustration. Why do you think there aren't more prominent medical professionals screaming this from the mountain?
Good question. And it seems since this study came out, since we put this study up, it has. Many doctors have began to raise the alarm. Many have previously, but now's the time where this needs to be headline news in all the major news organizations. And, I know it's not peer reviewed, but I have some good news on that. It may appear in a major cancer journal soon. I'll just say that. So, yeah, this is going to change things, I think, drastically, and we gotta share this information. 1 in 3 Americans are going to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime, projected 33%. Right? We don't want that. We want to stop that, and we don't want people to suffer through the chemotherapy process. It's just, I've seen so many people. They're stage 4 cancer. They get pumped full of chemo, radiation. They cut up their organs with surgery, and then the cancer comes back and they're left lifeless. And it's just a travesty. We got to get away from dinosaur medicine, caveman like thinking of destroying the entire body to treat a cancer. We got to target it, and we got to target it with non-toxic compounds.
It sounds like it would be impossible to make jokes about this, but I've got plenty of them. Come see me in Atlanta, Georgia, May 28th. May 23rd, and Raleigh, North Carolina, May 24th. I'll be in Burbank, May 7th, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, Spokane, Tacoma, and June 26th, 27th in Levittown, New York. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. There's more on this cancer treatment coming up in just a second. Over to Steph.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. All right, I'm seeing this one that says, during the first week of war, several tornadoes broke out in the Strait of Hormuz, an unheard occurrence. Thank you for that one. That's from John Jacob. I would be curious to know what happened to the person in the stands behind Trump who was allegedly shot. Was that staged as well? Was the shooter using blanks, fully laden swallow? We won't know.
Because they're not doing an investigation.
How weird. They're not doing an investigation on an attempted assassination that actually did murder somebody, but they're not doing an investigation. Oh, why would be that? Back to Jimmy.
So there's been another breakthrough in cancer treatment, and it's going to come from a place you didn't expect it. It's going to come from the gut of a frog. A single dose of newly discovered frog gut bacterium completely eradicates 100% of cancerous tumors within just 15 days in mice. Landmark study finds the natural bacterium Ewingelia americana selectively targets, colonizes, and eliminates tumors with no detectable toxicity. There's a single dose achieving complete tumor eradication, durable immune memory, and superiority over established therapies represents one of the most striking outcomes reported in cancer research. And here's the study. There it is: discovery and characterization of anti-tumor gut microbia from amphibians and reptiles. Ewingelia americana as a novel therapeutic agent with dual cytotoxic and immunodualatory properties. And here's just a little piece from that study. This striking phenomena suggests that amphibians may possess inherent resistance mechanisms against carcinogenesis. Although the underlying molecular and cellular mechanisms responsible for this apparent cancer resistance remain incompletely elucidated and represent an area of significant science interest, comparative efficacy analysis revealed that both anti-PD-L1 and DOX achieved significant tumor growth inhibition compared with PBS-treated controls, confirming the anti-tumor activity of these established therapies in our experimental model. However, E. americana demonstrated markedly superior anti-tumor effects, substantially outperforming both of the conventional treatments. Now, you got to take a minute and explain this to us?
Yeah, this is a groundbreaking cancer discovery. While it's in mice, it's groundbreaking. So what they did in this study was they went basically in a Japanese rainforest. These Japanese researchers They found some tree frogs, and they isolated, like over 20 bacterial strains from their gut. They tested all of them for anti-cancer activity, but they found one that was particularly potent. It was called the Ewingula americana. And so what they did was they first of all, they had like 10 mice, more than 10 mice with giant tumors with cancer. They injected into the tail veins of these mice the Ewingula americana bacterium. And those bacteria traveled selectively to the giant tumors. It went straight to the tumor site. It didn't go to any healthy tissues. It didn't go anywhere else. It went to the hypoxic environment, so lacking oxygen, of this tumor. And it eradicated 100% of the tumors. All of it was gone completely within just 15 days. And there was no toxicity to other organs. There was no weight loss in the mice. No abnormal markers. So it was not toxic to them. And the bacteria, so what happened was the bacteria went in, it colonized the tumor, replicated, and destroyed it via potent mechanism. So not only did it directly kill the tumor cells, but it elicited support from the immune system to turbocharge the immune attack on the cancers. And so that's why they disappeared. And they compared it to chemotherapy in different mice. They compared the Ewingula americana to chemo and to immune checkpoint inhibitors. The Ewingula americana outperformed the chemo and immune checkpoint inhibitors drastically. So this is a huge discovery. We got to start researching this, move on to humans.
So when it says a PDL1 and DOX, is that what is that referring to? What treatment?
PDL1 is a form of immunotherapy that they give for cancers, conventional treatment. DOX stands for doxorubicin, which is the most commonly administered chemotherapy. It goes by the name the Red Devil because it's highly cytotoxic to the entire body.
So while they tried those conventional ones, they did effectively suppress tumor progression and delayed tumor growth. Only one complete response was observed in the anti-PDL1 treated group, and neither therapy achieved consistent tumor eradication across the cohort. In striking contrast, the E. americana completely eliminated tumor cells and achieved 100% rate across all treated animals. That seems almost too good to be true, doesn't it?
It does. So that means every time they injected this bacteria into the tail vein, the tumors disappeared completely without fail every single time. And they actually did reintroduction experiments. So they reintroduced the cancers to the same mice whose tumors disappeared, and the tumors couldn't grow. It had immune memory. The mice had immune memory as a result as well. So, I mean, that's also very promising. So it's crazy. Nobody's really investigating bacterium for eliminating cancer. There's GMO bacterium that have been developed, but those are dangerous. This is natural. And so, we really got to hone in on this, test it in more mice, more cancer types, find the safety, find the dosing, and then eventually, move on to humans. And you have to remember there's easy fails. Basically, if you inject it and something goes wrong and it starts to infect other organs, which could happen possibly, an antibiotic will, cut that off. And so there's an exit mechanism if something went wrong. So that's the other good point about it.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is amazingly great news, right? The fact that it's probably going to be suppressed and Big Pharma will try to keep it from you. That's another story. But do you think Big Pharma will be able to find a way to make money off this and switch from chemotherapy to this therapy if it works in humans?
First, they won't. Well, actually, they could patent a version of this bacterium if they modify it, which wouldn't be surprising. So it wouldn't surprise me if they go find this, they genetically modify it, and then further they isolate, a single compound and claim it's as good, so they could do something like that. but they cannot just, patent a natural gut bacterium. So, we'll see if they try something. But in the meantime, we need independent scientists on this. We can't let it be suppressed.
How do you? First of all, that seems like a crazy idea. Hey, let's take some bacteria from a frog's gut, see if that cures cancer. How did they come up with that idea?
Good question. Good question. They must have had an idea previously, some previous research, and just the understanding that these amphibians don't usually get cancer. So they thought, maybe there's something in them, in these amphibians and the reptiles, that might be able to fight cancer. And they went to the microbiome, thinking perhaps that was a reason. And maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Well, we're finding out how important your gut microbiome is to your overall health, right? But which seems to be new information. How long have people known about the connection between your gut microbiome, and your overall health, and why is it only coming out now?
Yeah, it's vitally important, and you're right. It wasn't really talked about, 15, 20 years ago. It slowly gained traction. And it is of vital importance, particularly, in developing children, small infants. In fact, 25% of American babies now have zero bifidobacterium. That's the, keystone gut microbiome microbe that you need for healthy development. And so 25% of babies don't have it anymore for multiple reasons. For pesticide use, C-sections, no breastfeeding, hypervaccination, all these different things are contributing to that loss. But that loss increased the risk in that study of asthma, allergies, and developmental issues. So we got to start paying attention to this and restore our microbiome to what it was, hundreds of years ago.
RFK used to talk like this when he came on my show. He since has kind of backed off this, and to the point where in testimony in front of Congress, he said that the COVID-19 vaccine was safe and effective. Which is a bit of a heartbreak. Can you want to comment on what's happening with RFK and his ability to get anything done?
Yeah, all the progress that has been made in the past year on vaccinations, the big vaccine overhaul of the childhood vaccine schedule, they shrunk it from like 80 doses down to about 30 routine doses. They, took away or stopped recommending universal hepatitis B shots for newborn infants. So they did lots of good things, but then that was reversed suddenly about a month ago by a judge named Brian Murphy. He literally stopped those changes in their tracks and reversed them. And so we're back to where we were, 3 years ago. So, nothing really changed. Unfortunately, they tried. And now they're not talking about vaccines really at all. And, we still see them on the market. We thought they would be pulled off. We thought we would at least get a black box warning. That hasn't even happened. And, we've documented in our own studies, hundreds and hundreds of verified deaths via autopsy evidence, and still no black box warning.
Okay, well, guess what? There new information that there has been cancer cures that have been suppressed by the CIA. That story coming up next. But if you'd like to hear I know it sounds crazy. Jim, you have jokes about this stuff? Yes. Come see me May 23rd in Atlanta, Georgia, May 24th in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'll be May 7th in Burbank, California, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Tacoma, and Levittown, New York, June 26th and 27th. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Over to Steph.
All right. Tullio Pantaloni. Between this pesticides, weather modification, how can this be seen as not done on purpose?
Right.
This is depopulation. That's Tullio. Thank you, Tullio, for your generosity. So Iran blows up the enemy radio installations, and soon after they suddenly have record rainfall. So much for the need for those desalination plants. Oh, Nathan. Kelly Singer, what's up, Kelly? Thank you for your generosity. Please release the Epstein files, Kelly. The Jewish religion teaches that Jewish souls are literally worth more than non-Jewish souls. This is the source of all our problems. Savage. A DARPA N3 program was released and correlates to COVID-19. Andrew Lapinese. Maybe Tyler had a cartoon gun that shot out a flag that says bang. Diligent escape. Jimmy, are you interested in going to Rumble right now, or you want to do one more segment?
Let's do one more segment.
All right, thank you.
With Nicolas.
All right, back to Mr.
And then
Jim.
Then we'll switch over. Do you have time to do one more segment?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So let's get into this. Here's it's really, everybody should follow you on Twitter. It's full of amazing information that you're not going to get other places. The CIA classified a 1950s study showing antiparasitics disrupt cancer growth and kept it buried for over half a century. Whoa. And here's the study that I guess recently became unearthed. And you can read it for yourself. It talks about parasitic worms which live in the intestine exhibit a pronounced, they deposit in their bodies large quantities of glycogen, which is a fuel for cancer. The accumulation of glycogen is one of the properties which they share with tumors. The tissues of both intestinal parasitic worms and cancer tumors belong to the... So tell me about this study. What they knew, how long ago they knew that antiparasitics, meaning like things like ivermectin, were possibly treating cancer. How long ago was this, and why did they suppress it, and how did it get released?
Yeah, this is another crazy story, and some of the stuff, you can't even make this stuff up. So yeah, in the 1950s, the CIA obtained a document from Soviet scientists. It was actually a Soviet study where they did find that parasites and tumors exhibited similar behavior in the body, similar mechanisms of how they grew. They both loved sugar, they loved glycogen, and they feed on it, and it helps them grow. They found they work in similar ways. But the big part of that Soviet study was they found that the antiparasitic Myrcil D did exert anti-cancer activity in animals. So they literally tested it, and the tumors shrunk, right? And so the CIA had that document in the 50s, and they classified it for over half a century. Over half a century. So imagine if they had publicly released it, said, look what we found, this is important research, perhaps we would be 50 years ahead in this anti-parasitic and cancer research. Perhaps millions of cancer victims could have been spared. But now we were set back. And we're picking up the pieces. And that's why, it's no surprise the CIA buried this, given our recent study where we found that 84.4% of the cancer patients reported to have benefited in their cancer.
Using antiparasitics like ivermectin and mebendazole, right?
Yes, ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, all of these exhibit anti-cancer activity.
Why is this just coming to our attention now?
They declassified it actually in 2011, but it went under the radar. Nobody really picked up on it, and it recently resurfaced, and rightfully so, because we have to understand what our government was seemingly burying and hiding from the population. And it was just ridiculous. That should have been publicly available knowledge. Scientists would have been all over it. But no, they waited over 50 years, over 60 years to declassify that information.
Well, if there's one thing the CIA is famous for, it's looking out for the working class everyman out there. Am I right? It's like their entire surveillance state is just designed to spot when somebody finally figures out what they're really doing. It's not there for your safety. It's there to stop you from figuring out all the fuckery that the CIA is up to. That's what it seems like their surveillance state's for, not for us, obviously. So this has been quite an overwhelming amount of information today on cancer and the treatments and the cover-ups of the treatments and the causes of the cancers that are correlated with the COVID vaccine. Where do you see? I mean, they've stopped RFK from bringing this to light. They've very, very successfully discredited him as a crazy person, which is exactly what they do, right? They've been doing it to him. Everybody, he was the darling of liberals and the left when he was going after big chemical companies and cleaning up the Hudson and fighting GMOs and things of that, and fighting glyphosate, right? And he was the first one who won a big case to connect glyphosate with cancer, and everybody loved him then. And then now, since he's been speaking out against vaccines or telling the truth about them, they've completely discredited him. But now all that seems like the wave of this latest information about all this stuff, from COVID vaccines to the anti-parasitic, it seems like it's almost too hard for the normal, the establishment media, which is bought by Big Pharma, is there to manufacture your consent for Big Pharma's agenda, not to help you. But it seems like this is overwhelming now, and this wave of information will be able to, poke through that. Do you think that will happen, and where do you see us in 5 years?
Yeah, the tidal wave and tsunamis of information cannot be stopped, and the public opinion is swaying in the right direction, away from the falsified government narratives. In fact, a key evidence of that is a recent Rasmussen survey found that 56% of Americans now believe that the COVID-19 injections caused mass deaths. So now the majority of Americans appear to have woken up to that, and people are sharing all of this information. People are seeing that things were hidden, things were suppressed, and lots of people were damaged and killed, particularly in the past 5 years. And so, yeah, I think honestly, we could be in a very positive situation in 5 years, but it's going to depend on some key people making key and correct decisions and not being compromised. People have to stop being corrupted and do the right thing for a change. That didn't happen in the past 5 years. That's why we're at where we're at now. But things can change, and I think they will.
So, do you have any predictions on the future of RFK and his work in the HHS? Because it seems like he's fighting a losing battle, and I've made the case that he would be better off leaving the administration and speaking out against what they're doing, not only from them giving a legal shield to glyphosate, which we know gives everybody cancer, to him having to go along with the Donald Trump administration giving $35 billion to the makers of Ozempic, which is something that RFK was vehemently against. So it seems like he's getting compromised left and right. And I think he would be better off if he left. Sometimes I think that, sometimes I think not. But what do you think? Do you think it would be better off outside the administration criticizing them and doing lawsuits on behalf of people injured by vaccines or glyphosate and those other things? Or do you think it's better to have someone inside fighting for us?
That's a good question. Based on recent developments, right? The glyphosate order of, protecting Bayer, these criminal major corporations, protecting glyphosate, giving the makers liability protection for cancer, despite studies coming out. A recent study came out showing glyphosate causes over 10 major cancers in rats at low levels, low concentrations. And, we saw that. We see, him pushing all sorts of things we don't want to see him push. And it appears, there might be a time when he would be more effective outside of the administration. Because, right now he's sequestered. They're burying him. They're attacking him. And they're not letting him do anything. So I think perhaps there could come a time when he does that. But we'll see. I think right now you're right. He could be making more of an impact on public sentiment outside of the administration. But for all we know, he has something planned that may make a big difference, and they're waiting till after the midterms. I don't know. I'm not in there. We'll have to wait and see.
Nicolas Hulscher. Am I pronouncing your last name correct?
Hulscher, yeah.
Yes, Nicolas Hulscher. Everybody should follow him on Twitter at Nick Hulscher. Great information you can't get other places. You're doing great work with the McCullough Foundation. I appreciate you making time for our show and coming on. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.